thanks everyone for joining today for the Hydrowood investor webinar. Great to have everyone on board. Today I'm joined by Andrew Morgan, who's one of the co-founders of Hydrowood. As he'll go through shortly, but Andrew's been working on the Hydrowood project for the last 8 years, and they've got a really exciting story to tell and a huge opportunity ahead of them. Andrew's got a long background in forestry management, amongst other things. So very experienced in not only the management of timber resources, but also in the sale and marketing of the end product as well. We're also joined here by Paul Viney. Paul is the independent chairman of Hydrowood. Andrew and his business partner, David Wise, brought Paul on to, I suppose, help the business corporatise and also to look after the interests of incoming and minority shareholders. So Paul has got a long track record in CEO and CFO roles, including in the financial world and also in the startup world. He's also got experience in working with listed and unlisted companies on ASX and NASDAQ. So a lot of great experience there from Paul as well in terms of looking after the financial aspects. And we'll get Paul to have a chat later on in terms of his views on the business, coming in as the independent chairman and also the prospects financially. And Andrew will talk shortly in and around the operations and the business and how they're looking to run it on the go forward. Just as a bit of a start off, obviously this is an equity crowdfunding offer. The company is looking to raise up to $5 million in the raise, minimum of $2 million. Basically, the funds are being raised to give the company the working capital that's required to basically build up the inventory of timber. As Andrew will go through, it's a long lead time, a bit like making whiskey. So effectively, they harvest the timber, they mill the timber, and then it needs to sit in a warehouse for 12 to 18 months to dry out. So there's a long lead time and some working capital required to get there. But once that timber is moving through the system, then the business should be quite cash generative. Now, as an equity crowdfunding offer, basically you are becoming a shareholder in the company. So just like you would in an ASX listed company, you are buying shares and you will be effectively participating in the future success of the business. Now, that might mean capital returns down the track if the business is sold or listed on the ASX, and also the potential for dividends in the company as they become profitable. So, so you are an equity owner and shareholder in the company on a go-forward basis. Under equity crowdfunding offers, anyone can invest. You can invest as little as $500 in the offer. And if you do want to invest over $10,000, then you need to be qualified as a sophisticated investor. If you do have interest in that and not sure what that means, please reach out to us after the call, and we can explain that to you in more detail. Also importantly, look, for investors coming in early during this AOI period, if we don't hit that $2 million minimum, which we're very confident we will, effectively the offer doesn't proceed. So you will receive your money back. It'll be held in trust by on market. So there's no concern or risk around if they don't hit that minimum, that you won't get your money back. So it's a low risk proposition in that respect. Look, we would advise people to, if you're sitting on the fence, to get involved and get in early, because we do have some strong interest in the offer, and we can't guarantee it's going to be open for the full term of the offer as well. But before we step into the discussion, we just have a short video that we going to show, just to sort of give people a bit of a snapshot of the business and what they're up to.
The basic premise of Hydrowood is that we are harvesting timber that was submerged 30 years ago for hydropower in 1979. Myself and my business partner Dave were having a beer one night, and I think he suggested the idea, which I told him was bloody stupid. No, look, he'd been to British Columbia, so they use the rivers there to transport timber to get them to the mill, and sometimes trees sink. People started realising that there were trees underwater they could pull back up, and they were still fresh. It was really sort of a thought around These trees here have been underwater for 30 years. It's dark, it's cold. They probably haven't started to deteriorate, so why wouldn't that be the same process as what was in British Columbia? So we went to the University of Tasmania and said, hey, would you guys help us out on this? And we went and pulled some trees out using divers and tested them, and they were okay. When we first started, there was a whole lot of negative sentiment towards the concept. Can't be done, you're mad. You won't be able to build a barge that will do the harvesting. The wood won't be okay. We could only get out small logs. Spurred us on. I enjoyed pushing back and proving people wrong. When we went to Hydro and the government more broadly said, hey, we want to do this, there was a level of scepticism. We really needed to show that we were going to be good custodians of the lake and how we operated. So there's no divers in the water. It's cold and dark. We needed to be able to build something mechanised that would safely be able to harvest trees. And we went and built a barge called Hydrowood 1, which is very creatively named. It's driven by 3 thrusters and it's got a 45-tonne excavator that can harvest the tree by going down into the water column, grabbing the tree and cutting it, and then pulling it back up. There's an untapped resource here. It was an old forest. It's getting a second chance, so it's great to see it being put to use in really iconic builds that have got great stories. There is a misconception that we are dredging trees, that we're pulling trees out, from the bottom. We're not. They are standing trees. It's a standing forest that we're salvaging out of the lake. And then once we take those logs, we take them to a landing, and we might jump over to the next slide. And once they're on the landing, we process them. So we have a couple of guys measuring those trees. Thanks, Casey. Measuring those trees and docking them ready for taking to the sawmill. So we'll just jump back to the harvesting process. I've already touched on these things. So in essence, the piece of the tree that you can see above the water is no good for Hydrowood. It's not solid timber, it's waste. At the moment, we are looking at options around that. But we're salvaging the piece of timber that stayed underwater, and that is the premise of this, is that the tree, the component of the tree that we're interested in is the piece that stayed underwater and has stayed underwater since inundation. We don't want lakes that have a lake level that varies a lot, because that can cause actually acceleration in the degradation of the tree. And the reason why they're okay is because it is dark, it is cold, and it's anaerobic. They don't break, well, they break down very, very slowly. So that breaking down process is slowed by those 3 factors. I'm going to flip over to the next slide, please, Cass. So this, in essence, is the process and what we do to take a log from the water all the way through to market. As Nick said, it's this piece in the middle where we need working capital to really accelerate the growth of this business. So we take the log, take it to a sawmill on a log truck, gets milled into boards, and then we put it into a shed or our drying facility at Hagley, and that air dries for 12 to 18 months. So it stays there and goes from 50% moisture content to roughly 20% moisture content. So after that 12 to 18 month period, we take it to the kilns, we kiln dry it, bring it down to an Australian standard, which is 8 to 12%, 8 to 10% moisture content, take it to the dry mill for dressing. So you end up with a dressed board, and then it goes into a pack, and then it goes off to market. So apart from the extraction process, the fact that it's underwater, that process that you see in front of you is very standard for any other forestry product. Air drying, kiln drying, and milling. There's nothing particularly exciting about it. It's just a standard log, but with a very novel and exciting backstory and provenance. Next slide, Cass. So these are the core species that we extract out of Lake Pyman. Obviously, as we move around different lakes, the species may change. The species mix in terms of which volumes we get the most of will change. Of these species, I guess people will be familiar with Tasmanian oak the most. So mainlanders, from Victoria would be more synonymous with Vic ash. They're all eucalyptus species. They have slightly different colour, slightly different performance, but they're all in the same eucalyptus family. Myrtle, which is endemic to Tasmania. Blackwood, which you get both in Tasmania and into Victoria. Blackheart sassafras is endemic to Tasmania, and then you've got the two pines, so celery top pine and Huon pine. We don't get a lot of Huon pine, probably less than 1%. It's not. It's something that it's rare in the environment the best of times. It's even rarer now because it takes a very, very long time to grow. We've have harvested some trees, found some trees that have been carbon dated to around 1,500 years old. So it's a very rare species, but it's also very valuable. And celery top pine, a very durable species, beautiful grain. And I use this anecdote, I suppose, that the change in society's view of resource and timbers like celery top pine. Celery top pine was being used as railway sleepers in the 1980s. It's now selling $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, $8,000 a cubic metre, and is revered as a fantastic durable species. So that sort of gives you a bit of an explanation of why these timbers were left there. People simply didn't value the resource that we had at the time because it was bountiful everywhere else, and there were other places much easier to get it. Next slide, Cass. And I guess to me, this project, Limestone House, probably really it goes to the heart of what Hydrowood is about. I met with John Wardle yesterday. He had hosted a lunch for us in Melbourne, which was fantastic. We had some architects and developers and some potential investors there, and David Sutton, who was the owner, David and Kate, owner of Limestone House. And David actually, I met David in 2016. He came to the lake, saw the operation, fell in love with the concept, and then was very demanding of John and his team on insisting that Hydrowood be placed in his house. So everything you can see there that's made of wood is Hydrowood, all the way down to that table. The sheath at the top, that's all Tasmania, all Hydrowood oak. He invited me actually to go around there yesterday, but I didn't get a chance to go because I was running around selling my wares. But yeah, it's quite an incredible, I guess, homage to what Hydrowood is, and part of the de-risking process here. Part of why we're now coming out now around arrays and growth is that we've needed to get projects like this in situ in the environment for a number of years, so that architects and specifiers are comfortable that the timber will perform as we claim it will perform. It's not going to do anything weird. And so if we flick over to the next slide, this is just wood. It performs like any other timber. We've got now projects in, well, I think all states of Australia, in houses, on houses, outside on commercial builds. Cass, can you jump over to the next slide? In furniture, on floors, and it performs as we expect. So the high-end furniture market's certainly taken to it very quickly, but we've also just seen down in that bottom left corner, that's a renovation and an addition up in Launceston, Innovation House, which all that celery top pine outside is Hydrowood. So we can show that we can do scale, and we can also, it shows that now has been on that building for 3 or 4 years. If it was going to do anything different than a normal terrestrially sourced timber, it would have done it by now. So there's confidence there now in the market that we can grow this and put this into the market, and architects and specifiers can put it into builds with confidence. In terms of where Hydrowood is and our growth opportunities, I guess Lake Pyman is, we're there for the next 10 years. We have a 5+5 year license with Hydro Tasmania. Hydro Tasmania is a government business enterprise, so it sits apart from government. So it is independent from government change. So from Labor, Liberal, Greens, they sit apart from that, so they can't be influenced by a change in government. And there's a number of GBEs there that run in Tasmania like that.
So we have a 5+5 year license on Pieman. We have an ongoing dialogue with them around other lakes. So we can see that there's at least 5 other lakes within Tasmania that suit a Hydrowood operation. And that's out of about 65 lakes. So there is, I know there's a number of questions around IP that I've seen coming through the system. And the IP in this is not so much the machinery. The IP is in our knowledge and our team's knowledge around being able to look at lakes and assess them and have a unique, I guess, coming together of maritime knowledge and forestry. So the reason why we know roughly the volumes of Lake Pieman is because we actually used old mapping, old aerial maps before inundation, and what they call photo interpretive maps. So we actually knew the height of the trees. We can then therefore work out the rough volumes of those areas on a per hectare basis and work backwards, understanding how much soil log would be in that area on a percentage basis, and start to generate these maps of what forests would be, or what areas would be suitable to harvest, and also bathymetry data. So we surveyed the whole lake with sonar, and so we know the depth that we can operate at, and that then speaks again to the volumes that we know we can get out and are actually accessible by the 2 booms that we operate, one's being a 12-metre boom and the other one being a 28-metre boom. So we know the total volumes that we can get. So when we say that there's 60,000 cubic metres of volume recoverable in Lake Pieman, that's 60,000 cubic metres of wood that we know we can get with the current machinery mix. It's not 60,000 cubes all up. So we are leaving wood behind because we simply can't get to it. It's too deep. In terms of more domestic or other domestic opportunities, we're in current conversations with the Victorian government. So they came to us a couple of years ago about Lake Hume. In fact, it was the Victorian and the New South Wales governments. They came to us about Lake Hume and the river red gum in that lake. So we're looking at that as a potential option. And Lake Tinaroo in Queensland is another one that has been raised a number of times. And if you think of some of those Daintree rainforest species that are no longer obtainable, red cedar, those sorts of things are very prized, that Lake Tinaroo may be an option. In terms of international opportunities, we have an MOU signed with a group in Brazil looking at a lake called Lake Chucuri. Our thinking there is that we don't want to go and operate a system in Brazil. We don't speak the language. Sovereign risk is relatively high, but we'd certainly be interested in selling them a system, a Hydrowood system. We can build that unit. We can sell them that system. And then we can sell them our IP and let them go on their way to doing an operation like Hydrowood, and so license our tech to them. We've also been approached by a group in British Columbia. They're, I guess, BC and more broadly Canada are struggling with social license around native forestry and old growth logging. And the ENGO is interested in exploring opportunities of whether we can use what we've created with Hydrowood to extract timber out of their dams, so in that hydroelectricity space, to help fulfill volumes to sawmills that may be reliant on old growth native forestry at the moment. We've also had a couple of attempts at, or asked to be party to tenders for civil construction plays. Snowy 2.0, that was a project where an Italian civil construction company was putting a bid in, and they needed some sort of environmentally friendly system to be able to remove the trees out of the lake so they could get their machinery to the dam face. They were ultimately unsuccessful, and we never had that in our business case around that civil construction piece, but we continue to get those left of field opportunities based on just being in business, and we'll continue to explore those and assess them on their merits.
Andrew, while you're on that topic of international opportunities, it's probably worth touching base on other players that are operating in space.
Yeah, so in terms of, I guess, globally, we're aware of 2 other operations like ours. And by saying like ours, I mean mechanised. There's no divers in the water, simply safe from a safety point of view. That would not be accepted, and is harvesting at an industrial level. There's a group in Lake Volta in Africa, and there's a group in French Guinea called Triton. And Triton were probably one of the first groups to really give this a push, go right back to sort of 2008 and 9. They started in BC and actually moved out of BC quite quickly. They've focused very much on the, I guess, the civil construction side, and then had a few iterations through the 2010 to 2020. They were in Lake Volta and didn't do well with the stakeholders and the locals there. And I think they had a couple of incidents, and they've ended up in French Guinea. They actually got bought out by a French renewables company a couple of years ago called Voltalia. And so they're now on a dam in French Guinea supplying biomass into a biomass plant that I think is about to be commissioned. So there's only, as far as we're aware, there's no one else in Australia doing this. There's and two other companies in the world doing it at that, again, industrial level. There are other groups who are putting divers in the water, and they'll pull out a log every, here and there. But in terms of scale, there's not many players in the space. I just touched on that biomass production piece that Voltalia is there. They're looking at. We think too that there is potentially a biomass play here, which kind of links to the methane abatement piece. So there are timbers in some of those lakes that are not suitable to make appearance grade hardwood or timber, but they may be used for biomass, for energy or heat for green methanol, green hydrogen projects. So we're exploring those opportunities as a way to generate additional revenue back into the Hydrowood business. Next slide, Cass. There's our smiling mugs. So just a bit of background, I guess, on me. So Dave and I both started a company called SFM in 2001, Sustainable Forest Management. It's now, we manage assets, so plantation assets on behalf of investors. So we manage about $400 million worth of assets for a number of funds, New Forest, Mitsui, and some private players as well. 28 staff, about 50,000 hectares. And Hydrowood has sat in SFM for the last 10 years. So it's kind of been where it's been nurtured and developed. And I've described it as, like, I suppose, Hydrowood and SFM have shared a car and an engine, and Dave and I have been the drivers. And really this play here is that the drivers are going to be the same, but we need to give Hydrowood its own engine. It needs to go off on its own path. There's some really exciting opportunities. And it's got a great sort of pathway to growth. This coming out and sharing that with you and being able to give it an opportunity for everyone to be a part of that growth is a very deliberate strategy to break it away from SFM and have it has its own vehicle. David's currently in BC. He claims he's doing work over there, meeting some of the potential clients, but I also know that he's drinking lots of lattes sitting in front of nice mountain vistas. And Paul, I'll let Paul talk to his own wealth of experience. He's come on to keep us boys in line. So he's an excellent independent chair and has got a lot of background in corporate governance. Was the CFO for MyState back in the day, a Tasmanian bank. And I'll let Paul probably give him a short brief on himself if you want to, Paul.
Certainly, Andrew. Thanks, Nick. Yes, I have had a long career in finance and governance. That has included banks and fund managers, also cement and concrete and shipping and rail, all sorts of interesting stuff, including newspapers and the media. But more recently, the last 10 years, I've focused on venture capital. I run my own venture capital firm, and I specialise in high growth companies, commercialisation with no mistakes, and finance and governance matters. So setting up strong boards that know what they're doing and can move a company forward quickly. I also, when we get this right, also work on ASX and NASDAQ listings. So I have those pathways in place, and I've already had conversations with Andrew and Dave about our potential future on the ASX. The time's not right for that now. The ASX is not in great shape and isn't accepting many mid-cap, small-cap, micro-cap listings. So we'll wait. It's much better for us to build this company, become profitable and demonstrate success, and then go to a listing potentially in 2025, something like that, maybe 2026, with a much higher valuation. So yes, it will be my job to set up this board and make sure that we do it very professionally. We are in this capital raise talking to some fairly lumpy potential investors, and if they do come on board, and we hope they do, it's quite likely that one or more of them may request a board seat, and we'd welcome that in due course. Nick, would you like me to touch on financials and where we think this is going?
Yeah, sure, that'd be great, Paul. I think, yeah, financial return and what the return on investment might look like.
Absolutely. So we've done a mountain of work on the financials for this venture, and we've worked with Collins SBA in Hobart on this. We've modelled and remodelled various scenarios. We have considered what would happen if we were only to get our minimum raise in this on-market raise of 2 million, and we know that we could actually go slower but still grow this company over time to be larger and very successful, but it would take longer to do that. We're aiming for $5 million in this particular capital raise. We're very hopeful of getting it. The expressions of interest was bumping up against that number. So, and now with some new investors coming on board and subscribing right now, you know, we're pretty confident. So financials, I've just made a few notes. Some of this material is available, of course, to you, and for sophisticated investors to get access to our data room for if they're to invest larger amounts, we'll be seeing all of this material, and hopefully that gives them a lot of confidence. We don't hold back from saying that in 2024 and 2025, we will not make a profit. And that's because with all of the money that we're hopeful of getting in this fundraising event, we need to build up our stocks. And whilst you're putting material into a warehouse to dry, you don't make profit, you're not selling it. So that won't turn to profit until 2025 and 2026. So by 2026 year end, so 30 June 2026, we're anticipating a profit in excess of $1 million on sales of around $5.5 million. 2027, we're expecting that to grow to 9 million in sales and around 3 million in profit. The essence of this is that once this business hits its straps, it should be throwing out somewhere around 40% net profit. It's extremely profitable, and a lot of that's based on our knowledge of what we're doing. But in addition, we understand our margins, we understand what this product is worth, and we know that Hydrowood sells at a premium in the market. So all of that comes together to mean that this will be a very valuable company once we hit our straps. Right now, we've been fairly modest in the valuation of the company. We've valued the company at 7.3 pre-money, so before this raise, and we're looking for 5. So you might infer from that that the company's worth $12.3 million post this raise before we start to build up stocks. So we think there's an amazing opportunity to get quite substantial valuation uplift from this. You can imagine that a company that's pumping out $3 or $4 million in profit each year is going to be worth 20, 30, 40 million dollars. So that's the opportunity for investors getting in on the ground floor now in this raise. Many assets have been transferred into a new company, a clean company for this purpose, and that's called Hydrowood Holdings Proprietary Limited. It has one subsidiary, which is 100% owned by Hydrowood Holdings, and that's the operations of the company. So in our company, there's going to be about $850,000 worth of inventory right now, and fixed assets of around $4 million. So that's all the hard assets you've seen in some of our videos. Once we get up and running, it's very important to me as your chair to ensure that you know what we're doing. So we're going to have quarterly updates, so investor relations material coming out, and obviously, you know, an annual general meeting each year. So you'll be well informed about how we're progressing and how we're going against our plans. And we really do look forward to telling you some good news along the way. Nick.
Great, thanks, Andrew and Paul. Look, we've had quite a few questions come through, which is great. So I'll start shooting them at the guys, and we'll see where we get to. Look, just in terms of the operations, Andrew, look, the questions that come through, and you did cover this off shortly, briefly earlier, is in terms of how you actually are finding the trees under the water and working out how best to extract them.
Yep, thanks, Nick. So when we did the original feasibility studies, we actually did survey, so sonar survey of the lakes. So we did, I think, 6 lakes originally. So Lake Pyman, we surveyed the whole lake. So we actually dragged a sonar behind a boat, mapped the whole lake. So we knew that there was a presence and absence. So we knew where there were trees. And then in terms of how do we see them, at the moment, we're still using the physical presence of a bit of the tree sticking out of the water. We've tried a number of different approaches to seeing what's going under the water live, and it's still a nut that we're yet to crack, and I think we've got the solution. We tried cameras and we tried large light banks on the harvesting head. The issue being is the water is very dark. It's like Coke. It's very dark. Sunlight doesn't penetrate particularly well. And as soon as our saw hits the tree, you do get sawdust, but it's in suspension. And so you lose visibility. We've then looked at sonar. So we've actually been in discussions and have had some trials with some of the deep sea mining exploration guys in terms of sonar concepts. The problem, and you know, in the ideal cases, I want the operator to be able to see what's going on under the water when we go to harvest that tree and grab that log. The issue is that a lot of that equipment is very, very expensive. And if we knock one, and we need a sonar attached to the boat in the right spot, being the front where you can see on that excavator there. And those things are $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 each. And the likelihood of us knocking that off and dropping to the bottom of the river or of the lake is very high. So we just deemed that from a risk point of view to be unacceptable. What has transpired in the last couple of years, and if there's any fishermen on here, they'd see that the recreational sonar has gone, in terms of clarity and technology, has sort of gone ahead in leaps and bounds in the last couple of years. And so we think that the option here is to work with a partner like Garmin to come up with a solution whereby it's a cheaper sonar option. So they'll have a screen in there in the barge to be able to see what's going on live. And because we're only talking about consumer products at $2,000 or $3,000, $4,000 a head for a transducer, the risk, we can sort of accept that risk a bit better. So hopefully we're going to have that nut cracked fairly shortly, because we're no doubt basically sailing over the top of a number of very nice looking trees.
Look, another key question around the timber is also, what do you do with the waste product? Obviously, there's the background, the timber below the water is what's being harvested.
Yep.
The timber above, the grey stuff, is generally best used as biomass or firewood. So it'd be good to sort of talk about what you do with the waste material and what is the scale of this biomass opportunity as well.
Yeah, so again, at the moment, we either use that for firewood, so we sell that to the West Coast locals and sometimes trade some of that with a couple of the firewood merchants. But in the main, at the moment, we're letting that material fall to the bottom. It's just habitat. But having said that, we think there's a massive opportunity for this biomass piece. So we're using some of it shortly to test the embodied energy in that. And there are lakes. If we look at Lake Gordon, if anyone's familiar with Lake Gordon, it has an enormous volume of material that is above the water and has been dried, wet, processed, and it will not be suitable for a Hydrowood high value product, but in terms of a potential biomass supply, we think has got enormous potential. In terms of scale, Lake Pyman is 2,500 hectares roughly in size. Lake Gordon's 35,000 hectares in size, and it's quite a remarkable volume of resource in that single lake. So that's something that I'm exploring actively right now, and we'll continue to do that because we think that's a very, very exciting opportunity.
Great. Look, getting a few questions in around the licenses, and not only hydro but also government relations you've got. I suppose, firstly, sort of how confident are you around HydroTas on the current license on Pyman, and also sort of allowing you to get access to the other lakes that you're seeing the resources in?
Yeah, look, I'd say we've got an excellent relationship with Hydro Tasmania and an excellent relationship with government and the opposition and the Greens Party, for that matter. I think we probably have tripartisan support on this. We also have a very good relationship with the Wilderness Society, the NGOs. The Greens actually wrote in their last forest policy we should do more Hydrowood. They didn't confer with us, but that was nice to be put in there. So I think we've got a really good relationship politically with those guys. And Hydro Tasmania, we've been on the lake now for 8 years. We've had no environmental incidents, no major safety, no LTI. We're seen as a trusted partner in there. We're considerate of our messaging and understand that we have a license. That license is exclusive on Lake Pyman. We also operate under the forest practices system, so we have a lot of compliance. We have an environmental management plan and environmental impact assessment that we all operate under. And then keeping on that theme, we're certified by an internationally independent forest management certification system, PEFC, Responsible Wood. So they come and audit us every year for our operations. That's in terms of all manner of flora and fauna, how we manage soil and water, the whole thing. So in terms of the impacts, I've just noticed a couple of questions around that environmental piece. So again, we're very mindful. So everything has an impact. What we're trying to do is minimise that impact. So we use biodegradable hydraulic oil. So if we did have a spill, it biodegrades. It costs more, but we think that's worth it. We're aware of wedge-tailed eagles and sea eagles and nests up certain river valleys. We avoid them at certain times of the year per what the specialists tell us. So we don't disturb them during breeding season. The most popular species in the lake is introduced brown trout. The lake is man-made, so in essence, there's not the like. When we first did our surveys, we thought we might find threatened species. There's platypus in the lake that pop up, but we don't disturb the riverbanks, which is where they live. They happily live there. We don't move fast. We're very, all our machinery is moved slowly. It's a very slow process, so we're not causing wake. So yeah, we're quite mindful of that. And just circle back to the license. So we have a 5+5 year license for that lake. So we've got access to Lake Pyman until 2033, and that is exclusive because we have a number of overlays on that just does not allow another operator on that lake.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Andrew. Look, other question is I suppose around the remoteness of Lake Pyman. Firstly, how are you ensuring you get decent access to the lake? And secondly, how are you going to attract skilled workers?
Well, we have before. Look, it's not that remote. We certainly promote it. The marketing piece promotes remoteness, but I mean, the west coast of Tasmania is heavily industrialised. There's lots of mining operations. There's lots of towns. Rosebery's about half an hour away, 20 minutes, 25 minutes away from the operation. There's a mine site not far away from where we're at. Queenstown, Tulla. So there is a level of remoteness, and we certainly market that and use the beauty. The West Coast we call it a terrible beauty. It's a world of its own. The weather can be sunny and beautiful 1 minute and absolutely toxic the next. So we do play on that remoteness thing, and it is remote in the context of I'm in the middle of the CBD of Melbourne right now, so it is remote, and it's relative. But skilled workers, there's certainly no shortage of skilled workers on the West Coast. And what we've done in the past is we've actually rented a couple of houses and basically put people up in those places, and it might be a 7-day on, 7-day off type mechanism. And so that helps, particularly when housing's hard to find.
Another question's been coming through around how, obviously, you guys are continuing your role within the SFM business. And how are you going to split your time between SFM and Hydrowood?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I guess SFM's a growing business, but it's got its own executive team. I'm the managing director and providing oversight of that business, but it is running, well, and I really want to sit above both of these businesses. And my skill sets are being able to join dots, do deals, talk to people, and make things happen, and then pass that on to the management teams. So in my mind, this is going to be, they'll be split evenly, and as projects pop up, I was talking about that biomass project, that's going to be one of my very core focuses, because it's such a big opportunity to chase, and I think it's very tangible and it's very real right now. So I think, I don't think you're going to see any less of me on either Hydrowood or SFM. It's a split. They're both my babies, both my children. I care about them deeply.
Great, thanks for that. Another question is this coming in relation to, I suppose, the related party transaction that Hydro has with SFM. I think firstly there is the related party loan, and secondly the support services agreement that's in place.
Do you want to speak to that one, Paul?
Yeah, I think that's probably appropriate, Andrew. So what we've done with the formation of Hydrowood's been around for a while, but we have extracted it from being a division of SFM. Andrew mentioned that as being his the company that he's been operating in with Dave for the best part of 20 years, I guess. So we've extracted it into a new company called Hydrowood Holdings Proprietary Limited, and Hydrowood and its subsidiary, 100% owned Hydrowood Proprietary Limited. That being the case, we wanted to guarantee that we had access to Andrew and Dave's knowledge, and there's a services agreement that enables them to provide ongoing consulting support to the company. The terms and rates for all of that are documented and available in the data room. I think that's where they can be found, Nick. I don't think they're more generally available.
The information on that's also in the offer document.
Yep, indeed. In addition, SFM is quite a hefty operation, and so they've been generous enough to provide ongoing administrative and accounting support to us, which is great, because the last thing we want to be doing in Hydrowood is worrying about basic administrative tasks. We want to get on with the real job of salvaging timber and making sales. So that being the case, we have an agreement for SFM to continue to provide us with those sorts of services.
I think it's probably worthwhile pointing out there, Paul, that the support services agreement is around $7,000 to $7,500 a month. So it's probably a lot cheaper than getting on IT guys, IT people, financial people, and other services. And so effectively, the support we provided as required, as opposed to having full-time employees sitting there probably.
I totally agree, Nick. It's a very generous offer. Hydrowood's grateful for the support. It's extremely commercial. So I hope that answers the question.
Great, thanks, Paul.
Sorry, Nick, maybe there was a mention there of the support loan. So Hydrowood does have a loan from SFM, and that is because all of the plant and equipment and inventory was sold across from SFM into Hydrowood. We've made sure that those loans, and there are three, one's a core debt facility that runs through until 2028. The other two are different facilities which the board can choose to repay or refinance, but they're all on extremely generous terms with an interest rate of only 5% capped. So we're quite grateful that they are the terms. In due course, it could well be that we do refinance those, and we've already been talking to the NAB and Commonwealth Bank about inventory financing facilities ongoing, but that's a matter for the future.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Just going through another question here. It's quite a pertinent one. Is the cancelling of native forest harvesting in Victoria, and does this point towards better demand for Hydrowood?
Yeah, so I guess that was quite serendipitous for us that it happened a couple of weeks ago. So for those listening and not aware of it, the Victorian government came out and have brought forward their ban on native forest logging, which was, I think, going to be 2030 or 2027. They've brought it forward to the start of 2024, so 1st of January 2024. The impact that it had on us was we were immediately contacted by a number of mills and groups sort of talking about, well, maybe can we talk to you about supply of product? Those discussions are ongoing. I don't think it's going to hurt our prospects here, our demand. It's obviously going to continue to drive both price and demand for volume. Timing wise, it was couldn't really ask for anything better.
Are you seeing similar actions happening in other states? And I suppose what's Hydrowood's general view on this sort of banning?
I think there is going to be immense pressure. Western Australia has already, they're already closing they've announced that they're closing their native forest industry in 2030. I think we're going to start to see New South Wales, and you only got to look in the newspapers in Tasmania. There is immense pressure to do something and close those industries. I'm not going to make comment about whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. My background is in forest ecology and fire ecology. I think it's it's a point in time from a Hydrowood point of view and from an SFM point of view with our plantation management. It's a good thing from a business point of view.
Thanks, Andrew. The question here, I suppose the question was around using rotary aircraft for timber extraction and transport. I'm
just wondering whether David's dialed in from Canada to ask that question. No, rotary aircraft are incredibly expensive to operate in a forestry logging sense. We don't really need. I don't see a need for it. No, sorry, person who asked about aircraft.
I think probably a bit fairly high risk and expensive, and you're talking about 10-ton type logs you're pulling out of the water, so it's pretty heavy stuff too. Sorry, just going through some of these questions. The question has been asked around the capital raise process in terms of what happens if you hit the $5 million, and if you do bring in some larger institutional investors, is that going to change the revenue forecast?
I'll have a crack at that one, Nick. We think with $5 million, we have it completely covered. We will always maintain a positive bank balance right throughout the growth trajectory of the company with $5 million. So having $6 million, for example, or $7 million probably doesn't change that, probably doesn't change anything. So we'll be very conscious of the fact that taking over subscriptions, and the only way we can take an oversubscription above the 5 is to identify a high net worth or sophisticated investors and take them outside of the crowd raise, which still leaves the 5 million open for crowd funding people like yourselves on this call. So even if we did decide to take additional money, it would have to be for some other particular reason, such as they're industry aligned, or they wanted to write an offtake agreement and guarantee some sales for us. So they're the sorts of things we're looking at currently at the moment. Otherwise, we're very comfortable that 5 million is all that we'll need. We can't see that we'd ever have to revert to shareholders for further capital. Thanks, Nick.
It's just another question of clarification on the IPO timing. Obviously, you mentioned that you're looking to not be profitable 24, 25. Meaning that IPO is probably likely to be sort of in 26, 27 once you do hit that profitability point.
Yes,
yeah,
that's correct. I think I covered that earlier, but that's correct. I think it would be premature to list the company until it breaks into solid profit. At that point, you can really see that we're delivering on our promise, and that we're going to have an ongoing bottom line. The time for listing companies pre-profitability, I think, is over at the moment, and we're just not interested in taking that pathway. So we wish to stay unlisted until we're demonstrating a solid bottom line.
And that's sort of 26, 27 based on the forecast.
That's right.
The question of you, Andrew, and maybe a few Paul as well. Question is in and around all the IP where that sits. I think it's pretty clear that the IP has been vended and is owned by Hydrowood, and any future consulting work that Andrew or David does on behalf of Hydrowood around that IP will be revenue for Hydrowood.
Yes, I spotted a question on the chat there from Jeremy, and I was just about to push the send button, but you've really raised the question, I think. So there are no patents covering any of what Hydrowood has achieved to date, but there is plenty of know-how, and all that resides within the company. There are trademarks, and they are owned by the company. They've all been transferred in. So I think go to the know-how piece. If there had been something patentable, we would have lodged. But the issue here is that it's all about experimentation, trial and error, 10 years of work, and that's what's special. So we have a head start on anybody else that wanted to try and copy what we're doing. Andrew?
Yeah, that's right, Paul. And I think, so all the IP is in Hydrowood's remit. Any work that Dave and I do in developing, and other members of the team, I mean, we have had an active business and we have active people now. The guys on the lake, our sales, Darren, that IP is all there, and that has all gone to Hydrowood. All the licenses have gone to Hydrowood. So license obviously with Hydro Tasmania is with Hydrowood, and I guess I noticed a question there around the competitive advantage, and it all talks about this sort of idea around the IP. It's the ability to be able to look at a lake and be able to use that forestry know-how, the understanding of looking at a forest but underwater, but understand then, is it viable? It's a very large proposition. And if I was sitting here to you and saying, we're going to do this, we're going to build a barge, we're going to get the trees out, we're going to turn them into boards, you'd get laughed at every room. And I don't think there'd be 50 odd people listening to this proposition today. We've been through and proven all those pieces work. We know how to look at a lake. We know we can say with certainty, there is 60,000 cubes left in this lake. We know we can get it out. We know we can turn it into a board, and we know we can sell it. That's the IP. And I think the other piece of the IP is the brand. The media and I think the general population love the concept of Hydrowood. They're drawn to it. I mean, you've only got to look at how much. I mean, it's embarrassing to a point on some of the amount of media that we get on this, because you feel like we've done the story a number of times, yet a new journalist will come on board and hear the story and go, we want to come and cover Hydrowood. And you can't buy that sort of exposure. It's, advertising is expensive, but if you can get on ABC and go on moving to the country for a 15-minute segment, it's priceless. And so there's that capturing of that piece of, I don't think there's not a lot of reward for second. If someone else was to come along now, despite all the other barriers to entry, and I think there are a significant number of barriers to entry, things like that free advertising, they simply wouldn't get it. So I think it would be very tough for someone to come in, understand a resource, and then go and deploy $4 or $5 million to build the equipment, to then go at a hope that they're going to get the material out.
Look, another question that's come in is, what's the org chart look like? What's the staffing level look like? How many people are going to be employed? It's probably worth touching on how much of the process you run through is outsourced and how much is done internally as well.
Yeah, so it's a fairly, when it's at one unit, so I call one harvesting unit, it's pretty lean. So you're talking about one operator on the barge. So we've actually got AMSAR. So we actually operate under the Australian Maritime Safety Authority, another regulatory body that we have to operate under. And we got an exemption from them based on the power and size of that vessel. We're actually meant to have 3 people on that barge, and they would all be just trying to think of the terminology, level 4, not coxswain, master level 4. But we've got an exemption for one. So one person sits in that in the excavator and can drive that whole barge, and that's a safety piece, because we'd rather have one person in that excavator that's safely enclosed in a safe cab than having other people running around the deck. Then you have a boat driver for the tug, 1 or 2 people on the landing processing the timber. And then most of the other parts of the process for us are subcontracted. So the truck driving, the sawmilling, the kiln drying and the dry mill, that's all subcontracted operation. But then we have a couple of men in the warehouse and then a salesperson as well and a manager, an overarching manager. So you're not talking about a big team. You're not talking about 20, 30 staff. You're talking about 8 or 9 at max. Now that will grow. So if we put another unit on, you'd actually have to replicate that. I'll spend a lot of time on business development, but Darren Johnson will also be helping me in that BD space. And he's our sales manager at the moment. So yeah, it's a relatively flat and small team. And I see it probably continuing to be that until we start to scale if we replicate the units.
Yeah, great. And I suppose, yeah, where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years? You know, are you going to have multiple units or multiple lakes, or what's the?
Yeah, I suppose if you look 5 years, I think we'd be probably winding up on Lake Pyman. We'd have plans in place to be moving to the next lake. If we've got 60,000 cubic meters in Lake Pyman and we're operating at 8,000 cubic meters, we're going to be out of there in 4 or 5 years. Moving on to a couple of other lakes in Tasmania. I'd like to think that we've got a biomass model going. So supplying, you know, highest and best use would be we get out the log that's got value and then move to where there isn't highest and best use, we move to biomass. I noticed a question there about Victoria. So, you know, like Hume and an operation here, I'd love to have 2 or 3 of these units operating around Australia. I think, you know, back to the native forest piece, the demand for timber, people love timber in their houses. They love timber in products. And there's a clear recognition and growth from architects and specifiers and builders that timber is good in a built environment, that biophilic nature. And also there's the renewable piece there that it does lock up carbon. Now, you know, we are taking these trees out and they have got carbon locked up in them. And by stabilising them and putting them into the built environment, they're going to be there for the next 50 to 100 years. That's a good thing from a climate point of view. And that's driving a lot of why we're seeing mass timber buildings being built with timber, putting big pieces of glulam into buildings and replacing steel and concrete for that matter. So I think the demand for timber is going to continue to grow. And when Australia is already a net importer of timber, we bring timber into the country. We import it. And the volumes that we're talking about at Hydrowood are infinitesimally small compared to the total consumption of timber in usage in Australia.
Yeah, great. Look, the question has been asked, and Paul has answered it online, but this in around what the dividend policy looks like on a go-forward basis. Paul, might be worthwhile just
yes, absolutely. And look, I must say, Nick, there's another question that's been posed about what happens if things go extremely well and we get enormous demand because of the Victorian forests shut down. You know, that is an interesting proposition. That's it'd be a nice problem to have, I guess, but to expand to double the size of the operation, of course, would take more capital. And that's not something that's currently on our minds. What we would intend to do is stick to the knitting, make sure we deliver on the promises we're making now with the $5 million capital raise that is currently underway. I'm sorry, Nick, could you just repeat that original question?
The other one was around dividend policy.
Dividend policy, thank you. Yep. The company has thought about dividends already. This should be a company that throws out very substantial dividends from 2026 onwards. And we're anticipating that we don't have a need to retain the capital at this point. If that changed, we would revert to shareholders and discuss that with you. But at this stage, we can't see why we wouldn't have a 70% of profits after tax dividend payout ratio. And you know, so that really means that from 2027 onwards, we'll be paying dividends in the millions.
Yeah, great. And I think, sort of as mentioned in the offer document, you know, the target inventory build up is going to be around sort of $11 to $12 million worth of inventory with a commercial value of $18 to $20 million. So if you imagine that being turned over every 12 to 18 months, that'll give you a feeling in terms of where the company sees revenue going on the go forward as well. So we get
That's right, Nick. I might just add to that. In 2027, for example, we're expecting our inventory value. So that's not the sales value. That's the cost of the inventory in the shed to be $8 million. So you can see the company is after this capital raise capable of funding its own growth going forward at that level, which is pretty impressive.
So just moving through some of the other questions we've still got in here, still coming in, which is great. Thank you for that. Andrew, the predicted volume for salvage from Lake Gordon, obviously it's a lot bigger than all the other lakes put together. You did touch on the biomass opportunity there, but
yeah, I can't think of the number off the top of my head. The University of Tasmania actually did an independent study on some of the lakes and their volumes. If I think that was Ali who sent that, I'm happy to take that on notice and provide a link. I might even be able to submit that to you, Nick, and if people want to read it, it's publicly available document on Department of State Growth in Tasmania's website. Sure. So that actually speaks to, and remembering that's focused on sawlog. So what, that piece around the timber that we can turn into product. I don't think there's been any work done outside of our own work that we've done on the IP of the biomass. And obviously that's commercial. So at the moment, we're not going to put that out publicly because that's something that we continue to explore. We've done a pre-feasibility study on it, but we need to do a lot more work on understanding that resource profile. But yeah, there is an independent study out there on that sawlog volume that people might want to look at. So however, best way to get that to people, I'll leave that with you, Nick.
Yep. Cool. Look, another interesting discussion we've had with a few investors is in around how to look at Hydrowood as a business. Ultimately, it's not too dissimilar to a mine. These guys have got an identified resource of about 370,000 cubic meters of timber. If they're extracting around 10,000 cubic meters a year, that gives over 30-year resource life based on steady state production. So I think the discussions we've had, they will look at increasing production, but it's all around maintaining profitability and margins as well. You don't want to sort of flood the market with a product. So if you just look at the existing resource they've got, it's a 30-year resource life. Assuming it's a 5 to 10 year resource life on Lake Pyman. If they do get the access to the other lakes in Tasmania, which they're pretty confident that they will, there's a further 30 years of operating potential out of there. Actually, it's a bit of some questions that came through the Q&A on the EOIs in and around, I suppose, firstly, barriers to entry around, other people coming in and trying to copy you on the lake. And secondly, copycats in terms of trying to use the Hydrowood brand or, I suppose, market position to sell their own product.
Yeah, so in terms of the barrier to entry, my view is the barriers are very high. So things like bringing that independent certification in, that's something that Hydro accept is needed to give them confidence. The reason why we've been able to do that is because of our background in forestry and the fact we've had that forest certification for so long and understand it. Understanding the forest practices system in Tasmania and any other systems in the other states, that's quite, again, a deep barrier to entry. There's a question there around OH&S on the barge, and we spent a lot of time on research and developing that barge. It wasn't just we purpose built that barge. So we have a number of JSAs on how that bar, how to operate that barge safely and in an environmentally friendly way. It is unique. He's the operator is in a cab on water. There is a potential for a flip. It's never happened, and it never will under my watch. But he has oxygen in his. There's an oxygen tank in that cab. So if the absolute worst was to happen, he could get out and jump out of that cab and has 5 minutes of air. Obviously the machine's chained down. We're operating under Australian Maritime Safety Authority. We get audited. All the vessels have to be in survey. We get audited by Hydro. I noticed a question there about the management, the interaction with the contracts. So we have notifiable events, be that an LTI or major environmental impacts where we have to notify. We get audited on think hydro, forest practices system, AMSA, and our certification system. So we're audited a lot. We again sort of go back to that. We're operating at the highest level, and that's because it brings all together those other concepts that we manage assets on behalf of clients, and understand that we need to be operating in a safe and environmentally considered manner in order to have a good relationship with those clients. And hydro is no different, and the government, we don't want to be seen as high risk, and I don't think we are, and that's why we're there, and we can have very good dialogue with them about both Lake Pyman, but then the next lake and the lake after that. And so being that good custodian of the lake and understanding it, and understanding the political, the political landscape is I think deep, part of the success is that we've been considerate and focused at the high level. Hydro get approaches all the time for doing a Hydrowood-like operation, but when they say a Hydrowood-like operation, actually a lot of the times it's talking about a couple of blokes in a boat with a chainsaw going and trying to fall a tree or pull out a piece of human pine. And generally what happens, I think, is they're shown the tome of data. Here's all you go away and get all of this documentation for us and come back when you're ready, and then we can talk. And I just don't think that's not likely. So it's not just about the environment. It's not just about licenses. There's lots of moving parts. Safety is huge, and because we've been operating there, and again it goes back to that de-risking piece. We've been doing this. This isn't something that we've said we're going to do. We've been doing it. This is about a growth of growing this business into something pretty special, having been through the de-risking process.
Great. Look, really appreciate your time, Paul and Andrew. It's really interesting conversation. Look, if people do still have questions that haven't been answered, there is the Q&A facility on the offer page that people can see on the on-market website. Obviously, we're still in the private deal room period. We are looking to open up publicly next week. So if you like the opportunity and you can to get in, as I said, we recommend moving sooner rather than later. If the offer doesn't get to the 2 million, which we're very confident it will, you will get your cash refunded. Minimum investment, as I said, is $500. If you want to invest more than $10,000, you need to be a sophisticated investor. If you have questions on that, just reach out to myself or support@onmarket.com.au, and we can help you through that process. Look, really appreciate everyone's time. We've managed to keep almost 90% of the participants on the call to the end, which is a good effort. So people obviously interested, which is good. Andrew, Paul, any final comments that you wanted to make? I will also say we will make this video and this webinar available on the website. We'll send it around to people as well. So I think there's been a lot of good things discussed, which I think will be useful for people to follow up on.
Just from me, Nick, thanks for everyone on the call. Thanks so much for your interest. Hydrowood certainly does attract a lot of attention. So we look forward to seeing you as shareholders. Thank you. Andrew?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Thanks, Paul. I just wanted to thank everyone for attending, and the expressions of interest really have been quite humbling. The amount of interest we've had in this project is pretty amazing, and as I said, quite humbling. So thank you, everyone, for being here. And if you've got any other questions, always feel free to send them through to Nick or I, or through the on-market site. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.